welcome once again to Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams. Senior Focus is a show designed for adults over the age of about 50 or so, and we come to you on Armstrong's Channel 20 and 100. And thank you to Greg Roten from Armstrong, who brings the show to you every month. Also, thanks to the Canfield Library, they let us use their meeting room to film the show. And today we're going to be talking with a guest who's been here before, Dorothy Barto. And Dorothy is with the Alzheimer's Network, and she's going to explain a lot about what the network does and the services they provide in the local area. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and why don't we just start at the top with some basics on how people can contact the Alzheimer's Network, and then we'll get into exactly what you do.
Okay, one of the easiest ways is of course, the regular telephone, 330-788-9755, and we can repeat that later too. But that is the main way. We also do every health fair we can. We'll be at the Canfield Fair when that's on, and we have a lot of contact with folks there. Can answer some initial questions, give them some direction, encourage them to get to the doctor, find out what's going on if they don't have a diagnosis, and look into it could be something else, and I hope it is.
And again, this is a group of local volunteers, correct?
Right. We serve the local area, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana counties, and also Mercer County and PA.
Now, what are some of the services that you provide? I know we want to especially focus on the support groups, but you do quite a few different things, so maybe just start talking about those. We do.
Two of our main purposes are education and mentoring. So with education, we have seminars to guide people simply through the disease, through what they need to know, through some of the changes in the person, so that they understand a little bit, or forewarned this could happen, and be prepared. The support groups are wonderful. We have 12 of them every month, and it is necessary to find out that you are not alone, that there are other people, and sometimes those other people have wonderful suggestions that can help you in a situation you've got. Because so many times, so many of these things that a caregiver will think are bizarre are normal for the disease.
Right, right.
And there are ways to cope.
Now, how many years, I don't want to put you on the spot, but how many years have you personally been involved with support groups?
Well, it's kind of scary, but it's about 35.
Okay, and so was this something that you learned about from other people, or did you develop a support group, or how did that get started?
Well, it all kind of happened because my mom developed the disease, and that was back around 1981 or so, and there weren't a lot of even doctors that knew much about the disease.
Right.
And some of us got together and formed a little group, and we found out there were more people, and well, like now, we just added this 12th support group because there are more people, and this is an aging community. It's an aging nation, actually, but the point being, there are a lot of older people in the valley who are aging where they've had their roots, but their kids have moved elsewhere for jobs and so on.
Right.
And they have no support system because their kids aren't here.
Right, there are over, was it 5 million in the country?
At least that.
At least 5 million.
And it's growing. And there are some earlier onset people that are involved with our support groups. That's even more tragic when somebody's only 50 or 60.
Right. Well, speaking of the support groups, is it okay if we just mention some of the areas that, some of the towns? You have listed in Austintown, a couple in Boardman?
Yes, we have 2 in Boardman, actually.
And then Campbell also, Canfield, Girard, you're all the way over in Greenville, Pennsylvania?
That's right.
And Howland up in Trumbull County, and then you have, 2 in Poland now?
That has just grown, yes.
And also Lake Milton and Salem.
That's right.
Okay, so those are all on, again, well, let's see, we have a support group handout, don't you?
Yes, and this is something that we do. When somebody calls initially, we'll, of course, talk to them, try to give them some direction, but we'll also mail out some information to them about what we discuss. Right. And one of the things is, even if you don't have a a diagnosis, go to a support group and listen to what other people have found as their person was being diagnosed and the changes. And it might just tell you, you need to get to a doctor.
Right. Well, and speaking of the support group and other things that you talk about education and getting the word out to the community, you've got a whole series of brochures that you give out. And before we get into that, though, I know there are some events, and we'll talk more about some of the specific advice you give out to people. But why don't we talk at the beginning, and then we'll maybe bring this up also at the towards the end of what's coming up. Now, you have a garage sale.
Right, that has traditionally been our one of our fundraisers. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. Some caregivers who have the time or do not find themselves doing caregiving anymore, they can come. They can unpack a box, talk to the person across the table, because Alzheimer's tends to isolate both the patient and the caregiver. And so often, friends kind of drift away, but the people in the support group or the people who've experienced this, they get it, and they can relate to, another person who's been through the same thing.
Right. So the garage sale's coming up in July.
Yes.
And where is that located?
It will be at Western Reserve United Methodist Church, which is just outside of, well, it's actually in Canfield Township. It's between Cornersburg and Canfield on Route 62.
Right. And the money that you raise, that's, what does that go towards?
That goes toward things like the pamphlets that we do, the telephone bill, which is not small. We have a newsletter that we do. Okay. And that goes out to around 2,000 people. And it's not just one sheet. There's a good lot of information in this. And of course, to provide the educational items for the caregiver series, because we use the book, The 36-Hour Day, and a lot of other things that are supportive.
Well, again, we're going to be, well, let's talk again about some other later summer events. You mentioned the Canfield Fair.
Yes.
And what do you do there? What is the network?
We have a booth in the medical building, and we are there literally from about 7 in the morning until about 9 at night. So we've traditionally had more people contact us there than all the other health fairs during the year combined.
Yeah, thousands of people come through that medical building at the fairgrounds.
So
you have volunteers there who pass out the brochures and information.
Right. And somebody comes, it's the same thing pretty much as the telephone call. We try to give them direction, tell them where the local support groups are. At that point in September, we will have 3 caregiver workshops coming up and a legal and financial seminar, and they're all free.
Okay.
None of them has any charge to them.
Can you talk more about the workshops and what those will be about? And
the caregiver series of workshops, the first one is on symptoms, diagnosis, behavior, medications. I call it the nurse part. In other words, we have a nurse that presents that. She's very experienced, and she goes through and explains what actually is going on in the brain. The irony of it is we don't understand why it starts. Right. Or the researchers could do something about it. But at this point, we know what happens, we don't know why. And she goes through and explains the new medications and that sort of thing. And then the second is about the legal and financial issues and what is available in the community. Because if you have a person who might need a day program, do you know that there are adult day programs? If you've never needed one, you might not even know they exist. Right. And we coach them through what Passport is like and what qualifications for these programs are like, and the veterans programs that can be helpful. Again, if you haven't been down this road, it's all new. Sure. Yeah, and well, I'm glad you mentioned adult day programs, because we've had a couple of the programs on. And that's, again, where maybe somebody goes from 8 in the morning till about 5, and they have a meal and activities and things. And it gives like a break, basically, to the caregiver, or they can work.
Yeah.
And, right, and it's safe surroundings, they are secure sites so that people are not intended to be able to just walk out the door.
Right.
Because sometimes they really do want to go home,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the safest thing to have happen.
So again, these are workshops that'll be coming up right after the Canfield Fair in the fall.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And we deal with safety issues and for the caregiver, learning to cope with the changes. The legal and financial will be presented by an attorney because that's very complex.
Sure. And then, again, if people call in, and we can give the number out again, I guess, at this point.
Okay, it's 330-788-9755.
All right. And they would contact your office, and again, maybe we can go through some of the information that you're able to provide to folks. I know one of the things you mentioned or you talk about is to contact a doctor. If somebody's unsure, they have questions about the behavior of their parent or loved one, you could talk maybe about the first step.
That's one thing, that there are as many as 80 different disorders that have similar symptoms to Alzheimer's. Even something like an untreated diabetic or somebody that's not performing their diabetic chores properly, dehydration, urinary tract infection, all of those things can make somebody just a little fuzzy. And the doctor needs to look at the whole picture. They start with some of the more easy things to handle, the blood work, urinalysis, some other things that they can do easily, and then maybe proceed to a scan, an MRI or a CAT scan. There might be something that they can identify there. Ironically, you can't see Alzheimer's on an MRI or a CAT scan. They're working towards being able to understand it better through using a PET scan, but it's still not definitive. The way a doctor is going to figure out what is going on is do those initial tests, and then over time watch the behaviors and see how they change, watch the abilities.
Right. If you get to a doctor earlier then, are there some things that can be done early that can help in slowing the progression of the disease?
Absolutely, and that's one reason to get a diagnosis. There's no reason to put your head in the sand because you could be robbing that person of some quality of life.
Sure.
The initial studies on one of the drugs that I'm familiar with said that it can slow it down for 3 years. That gives that person a better quality of life for 3 years.
Right.
So you want to find out what it is and make your plans for the future.
Well, in many ways, it's talking about quality of life, it's similar to maybe a cancer diagnosis where, if you catch something early enough, it may not stop the inevitable, but you have a better quality of life, as you said, for maybe a few years at that time.
That's right.
Then you have a brochure here dealing with Alzheimer's, what the family needs to do.
And that's kind of what we've been talking about. Get to the doctor, find out what his diagnosis is or hers, and move on from there. Do some legal and financial planning. You need to.
What are some of the things it says adapting to changes? And it says some tips you have here is organize and create structure.
Routine is something that patients really need. They need routine. They function a whole lot better with it. So it is important to get structure for their life.
And you say it says nurture positive emotions.
Right. Like if things start out on the wrong side of the bed, so to speak, that day, it may continue that way. So you try to keep things positive. And even though the caregiver might want to react to something like saying, well, don't you remember that? You got to change your terminology.
Yeah.
I said, oh, didn't I tell you that? And repeat and repeat and repeat again, because you have to let some of those things go and realize that it's not the same person. And that's hard to do. That's
Right.
why the support groups are so important.
Right, because physically you're looking at the same person, but behaviorally, they're
It's
not the
changed.
same. Yeah. Well, you have a brochure here about medications, and we talked a little bit about that. Are there any major improvements in that front, say over the last 5 years?
The last couple of years, they've combined Namenda and Aricept, and it's called Namzaric,
Okay.
which means you don't have to give 2 pills. You could give 1 pill.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people are even suspicious of what's this pill for,
Right.
which brings up another question. Do you tell the patient what they have? Some doctors feel that that is part of their duty to tell the person. But I had one gentleman that was told, in the doctor's office by the doctor, walked out, he and his wife went home, and he said, boy, he saw a public service announcement on TV, and he said, boy, I'm glad I don't have Alzheimer's.
Even though he'd just been told that.
Recent memory does not work.
Yeah. Well, that brings up, I guess, something that I think I've heard about. Are they able to find DNA markers? There's a lot of work with the genetics now. Any advances in that area?
There are a couple of proteins that they can test for, apolipoprotein 3 and apolipoprotein 4. One of those is good, one of them is bad. The trouble is, it's not a totally definitive diagnosis. It's not accurate enough. Mm-hmm. You can have the bad protein and still not get Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. You can have the good one and get it anyway, so they need something more definitive. Yeah. Pittsburgh did some interesting work with a PET scan, but it's showing more in the area of, that there's a lack of brain function in a certain part of the brain, but it doesn't say why. Mm-hmm. It just says this part of the brain is not operating as well.
They're not sure as to why that is.
No.
Well, speaking of Pittsburgh, do you also, as the Alzheimer's Network, you support the work of local researchers? Or
we
how
do.
Does that work?
Over the years since our beginning, we've given right around $27,000 to research. Mm-hmm. And that comes from the garage sale and from any of our other fundraisers. But that does help to keep that momentum going. We give both to Pittsburgh and to university hospitals in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. UPMC in Pittsburgh has done some really worldwide research.
Well, that would bring up a question. I guess there are some doctors here in the local Youngstown, Warren area that are geriatricians. Are those the people that you want to go to first? You want to? I mean, how many are there? Is there really an issue with that?
There are not as many as what we need.
Yeah.
The thing is, I'll often tell families, start with your family doctor, because that family doctor is going to know the person better.
Right.
But it's a short visit in there. That's why we suggest to families, we have a brochure that's called Letting the Doctor Know, because the doctor needs to know that, no, they're not remembering birthdays. They're not balancing their checkbook, because they put on such a marvelous social front. Oh, I'm fine, I don't have any problems. Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily, and here's the spouse going, no, that's not what we're going through.
In the background, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, once you have, again, a diagnosis and you're trying to deal with the issue of Alzheimer's, again, another one of your brochures from the Alzheimer's Network, it talks about legal planning. Mm-hmm. We talk a little bit about that, about how that works. What are some of the things people need to look to?
We tell them you should have in place the durable power of attorney for health care and the living will. Okay. That's very helpful when you get to the hospital, because they're probably going to ask you for it. Mm-hmm. And you might want to have a little packet ready to go at any time. And you should have a durable power of attorney for handling business affairs. Okay. And some couples have done that, where dad has the power of attorney for mom, mom has the power of attorney for dad. Well, if mom develops Alzheimer's, should she be making decisions for dad?
Right.
Because her judgment is not going to be what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. So, again, ahead of time, you want to, while the person still has competency, to some degree, you want to set these up, because if you wait too long, if the person becomes incompetent, I mean, for instance, at a certain point, they may need to go into assisted living or nursing home. That would be too late to set up some of these.
Some of it depends on personality. Some people are, well, like somebody said one time, they're mildly affected. But some people their personality changes quite a bit, and they aren't as amenable to what the family would like them to
Right.
do. So it's important to do those things and do them quickly.
And financial issues, I mean, this can include a number of things similar to what you just talked about with, planning, powers of attorney and things like that. But also, I think if you've never gone through this, the cost of care is astronomical.
It is.
And can we talk a little bit about what are the options? You've got people being cared for at home, and then people being cared for at a facility. What's sort of the difference there?
Well, some people, and actually if you figure it out, it's more expensive to keep the person at home. And often you have an older person taking care of an older person, so their health is at risk. A doctor said one time, when I diagnose Alzheimer's, I have 2 patients.
Right.
Because he has to watch that caregiver and their health really as much as the patient themselves. But there's home care, there are folks who use adult day programs, there are other steps into assisted livings, and then part of our caregiver series is to explain to people how to choose an appropriate facility.
Right.
Because if they are somebody who is likely to leave the facility, then they better be in a secure setting.
Right. And we've actually, unfortunately, had a few incidents over the years with people that were at too low a level, say, of oversight. Again, if you're in assisted living, there may not be a lock on the door. It's maybe more designed for people who have, less need. And so, yeah, you got to be very careful, I guess.
And there are some facilities that have specialized units. And we tell families, look into those before you need them, because you want to make your best decision first. You don't want to have to move somebody. It goes back to what I said about routine. You're changing their environment, you're changing the people around them. You only want to do that once. If you have to move them, maybe you do, but try to make your best choice first.
The less, change, the better, And, well, that brings up another of your brochures. You have safety concerns, and that also would apply in the house.
Oh, definitely.
If someone's definitely, they're taking care of somebody at home, are there some tips there that you talk about with?
Absolutely. The kitchen is one of the most dangerous places, and the workshop or the garage is another.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And, a gentleman who's always mowed the grass and considers that he's perfectly capable to mow the grass, what is his judgment? Is it at a level where he is okay mowing the grass or not? If a stick gets lodged under the mower deck, does he reach in to get it out?
Or turn it
does he
off?
shut the mower deck off first?
Right, yeah. Well, and speaking of safety and, driving in Alzheimer's, I'm sure that's comes up quite a bit where people have the beginning stages of Alzheimer's and they, everybody wants independence. But,
Absolutely.
How do you have that discussion?
That's not an easy one, and we try to get families to use the doctor as the intermediary there, and to make some suggestions like, well, why don't you let your wife drive for a while, and just kind of make the suggestion. And there have been other times when that doesn't work. Well, I've always driven, and the man is the driver, and traditionally that's what it's been.
Well, you also have something called an emergency travel packet, Be Prepared. And I imagine that would be, again, something that if you haven't had someone with Alzheimer's in your family, but you want to go on a trip or something, how do you do that?
And you want to have those legal documents in place. You want to have a supply of, even if it's a one-tank trip, you still want to have, maybe an extra change of clothing, some other things that you wouldn't normally have to have, because you're really living for 2 people.
Right.
So you better be prepared for 2 people.
And then you have something about activities for the Alzheimer's patient. Again, I'm thinking of somebody at home, but it could also be at a facility. But if you're at home with somebody with Alzheimer's, what is that sort of learning what they're capable of doing, or
That's part of it, and leaning on their past and what they'd done in the past and what their
Sure.
abilities and interests were. Although, like a lady who'd maybe crocheted complicated items that would involve a lot of thought processes and numbers and letters, and that's too much for her. And she can get very frustrated if people, say, well, you've always liked to do this. Here's a whole bunch of yarn, and you just love doing it. And she doesn't love doing it anymore.
right?
So it has to change to some other less complicated project.
Right.
And sometimes even teenage grandchildren can be helpful because it's something that they can do. They can sit down with the family album and, Grandpa, who's this? And Grandpa will know, even if that picture is 50 years old, he'll know.
But it might be the current memory that is not good.
Exactly.
But the long-term memory is still there. And we come to unexpected behaviors, and I would imagine that's where, later in the disease, there are a lot of difficulties with changes in mood and behaviors.
A lot, and sometimes it's like living with a stranger. You have a couple that's been married for 60 years, and all of a sudden he accuses her of being unfaithful to him, and you go like, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then being able to finish a task that they used to be able to do, and now that task has so many pieces, and they can't remember what the pieces were in order to do the task. Even something like washing the windows. Well, I need the ladder, and I need water, and I need some Windex, or I need rags, or whatever I need. You've got all of that stuff, and it's too much for the recent memory to hold on to.
Right. Again, we've been talking with Dorothy Barto. We only have a couple minutes to go. Why don't we remind people of maybe where the support groups are,
Shirley?
and if you want to just go down through the list of the local area.
Okay, we have them scattered all over the calendar, too. There's some that are daytime, some afternoon, some evening. Austintown is evening. There's a daytime in Boardman and an evening. Camel is evening. Canfield is morning, actually. And Girard is evening. Greenville is evening. The Howland group meets in the morning on the first Wednesdays. And then the two in Poland meet on first and third Saturdays.
Okay.
And then Lake Milton is an evening one. The one in Poland meets at noon.
Okay. And if people want to go to or sample one of the support groups, where do they call?
They can call that number, the 330-788-9755, or they can just come. We don't turn anyone away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dorothy. And again, we're talking with the Alzheimer's Network. There is support out there if you're dealing with Alzheimer's. You've been watching Senior Focus on Armstrong Cable. And thank you to Greg Roten from Armstrong. Also thanks to the Canfield Library, which allows us to use their beautiful meeting room here. And until next time, thank you for watching.